Elder Scrolls games are unbalanced and buggy messes. We all know this, we all love this. In most of the games you can basically ascend to godhood whether it was intended or not. But today, we're looking at more practical concerns. Getting paid. I'm going to get 1,000,000 coins in all 5 numbered Elder Scrolls games. Gold pieces in Arena and Daggerfall, Drakes in Morrowind, Imperial Septims in Oblivion and Skyrim. It's not a question of if we can, it's a question of how fast and easy it is. I'll be playing each game at the default difficulty and doing my best to avoid glitches, but in Bethesda games the difference between a glitch and a feature can often be semantic. Completely intended gameplay behavior can often lead to outcomes that are definitely overpowered, but stuff like item duplication glitches and fortify alchemy looping are off the table. We'll go in order of difficulty. You may be shocked to learn that the economy of the games generally gets more balanced and strict over time, with one exception. Morrowind is a game of almost completely unfettered freedom, and we're going to crack the entire economy in half in less than 3 hours. And we're going to do it at level 1 without ever fighting anything. Morrowind has so many different ways to get rich quick, and rather than head immediately to the best and fastest route, I just did every version I could think of all in a row, because the fastest route is boring, and I wanted to actually have fun before the later games get real monotonous with it. But I will also show you how to absolutely speedrun it.
Stand up. What's your name?
My name is Millionaire.
Come with me.
This is where they want you.
Don't show from where.
I chose an Imperial because money is the domain of the Imperial with that bonus Speechcraft and Mercantile. The Emperor's face is on the coin after all.
Ah, yes.
In terms of skill allocation, really all that mattered was that alchemy was a miscellaneous skill. I built this character so that once I had 1,000,000 drakes I could just go and play the game normally. Consider this a quick start guide. The lady sign is generally excellent, and the bonus personality pushes our initial personality to 75, which means that despite being an upper crust Imperial in a downtrodden region, the average person is really going to like having us around. Most people know that you can steal the limeware platter from the Census and Excise office, drop it, and then pick it back up after you've been scolded, but that's for amateurs. Get behind Solus Gravius and do the same thing with the key to the Census and Excise warehouse. This gives you immediate access to an entire warehouse of unguarded gear and goods to steal. Hand over the ring to everybody's favorite Bosmer, sell as much of the warehouse spoils to Arill as he can afford. Climb the lighthouse, steal the skill book, jump off the lighthouse, then loot the hollowed out stump. No, not that hollowed out stump, this one has an enchanted battle axe in it. Not worth much, but it can kill ghosts and it's free. We'll also wait outside at night to steal Fargoth's ring and gold and not hand in the quest so we can keep the gold for ourselves. If you've ever even glanced in Morrowind's direction, then you'll be aware that it sometimes arraigns wood elves in shockingly expensive clothing. If we're going to be rich, we might as well look the part. I also pick up some mushrooms from around Sedanine before hopping a silt strider to Balmora. The Balmora Mages Guild is the first place you should head in the game, just in general, and by reporting to Ajira for duties we can hand in these mushrooms to advance in guild standing. Then she'll task us with swapping out a soul gem in Galbadir's desk with a fake one, which allows us the opportunity to steal thousands of drakes worth of gems and a limeware platter. Just don't try to enchant anything using them with Galbadir, or she'll recognize them and call the cops. While we're in Balmora, we'll head over to Nalcaria's shop and steal her very expensive alchemy equipment. Also in Balmora is the Almcivi Temple, where Dralvel Andrano has set up an alchemy shop, but I'm still carrying skooma that I stole from the Census and Excise warehouse, so he won't do business with me. I'll leave it at his feet as an offering and get about business. Dralvel carries wickwheat and marshmallow. These two ingredients combine together to create a health potion, and he restocks his inventory every time the window is closed. There is a glitch to increase the amount he restocks, but that is a glitch. Besides, OpenMW makes buying things in bulk just a matter of button mashing. With a meager alchemy level of 5, almost all our potions fail, but it's still enough to turn a profit. This completely intended behavior is enough to earn functionally infinite money and print your own health potions for adventuring. It's not even an exploit. I'm literally just playing the game. But it's pretty slow since Dralval doesn't carry that much money. Still, this is a great way to earn the money to buy the teleport spells stocked by the priests downstairs. Almcivi Intervention, Mark, and Recall. Back to the Mages Guild, and we'll use the Guild Guide's service to teleport to Caldera. Up the tower in the Mages Guild we can steal another very expensive alchemy set, and on a bookshelf in the lobby there is a lot of soul gems and books that are completely free to take. Just don't steal the cork bulb route, that's off limits for some reason. Beric Germain in Caldera carries an Amulet of Recall, honestly one of the best items in the game. Not relevant today, but if you don't know about this, you owe it to yourself to get it. Across the street and down the hill is the Gorak Manor, where we can steal and then sell some Orcish armor to Creeper at tooltip value and instantly get almost 5k. Creeper has a high gold value and never haggles on price, so a casual playthrough will likely end up using him as a primary merchant. Dropping a mark at Creeper is the best choice in my opinion. The Mud Crab Merchant, just a 3-minute water walk east of Vivec, is a better version of Creeper who carries 10k. But he's in the wilderness, so resting 24 hours next to him spawns enemies. And neither of these vendors allow you to use high-level mercantile to sell items above tooltip value, so their usefulness wanes at higher levels. Still, brewing potions and selling them to the Mud Crab Merchant is without a doubt the fastest way to become a millionaire in the base game. With proper use of Mark, Recall, Divine, and Almcivi Intervention, you can get to the Mud Crab Merchant and back again very quickly. You don't even have to worry about carry weight because you can use teleport spells well over encumbered. Just down the road from Caldera there are some stone flowers, the petals of which I want for Ajira, and we can Almcivi Intervention back to Balmora instantly to deliver them. I don't remember where I got the gold cannet. If I find it in the footage, it's on screen now. By handing over the stone flowers, as well as a few others, a ceramic bowl that I picked up off the table on the way in, and some stolen reports hidden under some furniture, we're given a lot of expensive potions to sell and directed to Edwina Elbert, who has some gopher work for us before tasking us with temporarily borrowing a book without permission. And she gives us 2 scrolls of Ondusi's Unhinging. The Charmander Meridian is located in a locker alongside a second skill book which we can sell for cash. But, more importantly, the second scroll will let us into Hlalo Manor in Balmora, where we can steal some expensive clothing from Rowland Hlalo's corpse, and then trap ourselves in the balcony because for some reason, we locked the door behind us on the way out. After using Almcivi Intervention to escape, I head back upstairs in the Hlalo Manor to sleep. Did you catch that? I pretended that I did the Mages Guild quest to get the free open average lock scroll, when, really, I was trying to get the intervention amulets. But I forgot that I'd have to kill a scamp in the last step of the quest chain, so I can't do it under the no fighting stipulation. I'm a genius. Oh well, didn't need them anyways. That shows mysticism as a major skill. For casual playthroughs, having mysticism as a major skill or doing the quest chain for the amulets is kind of a must for sanity's sake. It's important I slept before I got too much experience in Mercantile because I needed to sleep at least once in order to start the quest to go to Mournhold, but I had to do it before I had enough skill levels to reach level 2.
You will die.
Hlalo Manor was a convenient place to spawn an assassin because it's out of the way and the door outside is right there, but also I just trapped myself in the balcony again and need to use the Amulet of Recall to escape. The fastest way to Ebonheart is to take a guild guide to Vivec's Mages Guild, buy a scroll of Divine Intervention from the front desk, and then use it immediately. From there, we can get a teleport to Mournhold where we'll buy Masterful Unseen Wisdom and Zenithar's Gospel, which will give us access to Fortify Personality and Fortify Mercantile in the spellmaking menu. We'll spellmake a spell to fortify both by 100 for 1 second. Fortify skill spells are exclusive to the Tribunal DLC areas, and Fortify Personality isn't enough. Otherwise, I could just grab Wisdom from the Priests in Balmora, spellmake a 100 for 1 second personality spell, and then trade a Daedric bow back and forth with the Shopkeeper of Area Effect Arrows in the Vivec Foreign Quarter Wasteworks. Something of a pattern you'll notice in full 3D Elder Scrolls games is that DLC is usually required to get particularly efficient gold. Without the Tribunal DLC, the Mudcrab Merchant is the only way I'd advise doing this. Unfortunately, the cast chance for this spell is 0, so we'll need to train in Restoration to be able to use it. That's simple enough. Money is power, and we are already very powerful. 50% cast chance is good enough, although in retrospect I should have gone farther. With this spell under our belt, we just need to go to Mournhold and take our pick of shops with a high cash value to grift. By casting the spell and then initiating dialogue, we can buy items low and sell them back at a profit. Bola Indalin in God's Reach has a pool of 8,000 drakes that refreshes every 24 hours, and he carries adamantium axes which have a high price. These axes also restock every day, and I accidentally start stacking them in his inventory, which makes my job harder. This is the shop inventory glitch, which would allow you to buy large amounts of potion supplies easily. As advantageous as it is under those circumstances, in this case it means that I now have to navigate an amount menu every time I buy this axe. This stock overflow glitch is actually so easy to trigger and so impossible to undo that if you're going for a truly glitchless run, it can cause multiple resets on accident. Modders are reticent to patch out this behavior because under the majority of circumstances is actually a big quality of life improvement. But I'm sure there's an optional patch for it somewhere. Before the gravy train can chug too hard though, I remember the one major drawback to staying at level 1. The only way to regenerate magicka without leveling up is to take non-teleportation taxi services such as a boat or silt strider. Even without this arbitrary restriction, it means that I'd have to return to an inn or guild to rest between spellcasts, which would take way too much time. Not to worry though. The alchemist in the Grand Bazaar has a gold pool of 9,000 drakes and carries enough alchemy equipment to drain his coffers in just 2 transactions. I can simply buy restore magicka potions from him and then take all his money, wait 24 hours, and then repeat. I also do my best to empty both our inventories in order to streamline the process. But that damn knife ear just never stands still. Every time I wait, he's somewhere else, and even when I'm chasing after him, he never wants to stop moving. So I get tired, buy some more potions, and move one door down to Cacia Socia. Cacia sells glass pauldrons. A very simple trade, and I can take all her money moving one item back and forth, and... Where'd it go? Oh, she put it on. I forgot vendors do that. Not to worry, I can just do the same thing with the glass bracers instead. A little more inconvenient, but it's still just 2 transactions. So this is it. This is the pinnacle. Cast a spell, buy the bracers, sell the bracers, wait 24 hours, chug a potion, and repeat. If she doesn't accept the deal the first time, mash the button until she does. Bribe her a few hundred gold if her disposition falls too low. This isn't the only way of doing this, by the way, and it might not even be the most convenient. By fortifying your fatigue to astronomical values above your maximum fatigue, you can benefit from an unintended behavior of the way that fatigue calculates your success rate. But that's functionally a glitch, and fortify spellcrafting is the most straightforward. And even if it's cheesy, it is at least intended behavior. Fortifying fatigue enough to actually pull off this overflow would basically necessitate alchemy looping. The process took about 40 minutes. I had to do this a little under 100 times. From waking up on the boat, this took about 3 hours with a few breaks here or there, and I could have skipped almost everything I did prior to Mournhold. Because I was curious just how fast you could do this, I did a second run with optimized routing. We pick a Breton for their increased magicka pool and plus 10 to restoration, specialization magic with favorite attributes of willpower and speed. Major skill restoration, mercantile, athletics, acrobatics, and speechcraft. Minor skills? Who cares? Atronak birth signs so that we can get more value out of our exclusive health potions, as we won't be getting back magicka from resting anyways. From the Census and Excise warehouse, we head straight to Balmora to grab the Sword of White Woe. A sword with a 17,000 gold value. We join the Mages Guild and take a Scroll of Divine and Almsivi Intervention from the guild chest, teleport to Caldera to steal and sell the Orcish armor to Creeper, Almsivi Intervention back to Balmora, sleep to spawn an assassin, teleport to Vivek, Divine Intervention to Ebonheart, get transport to Mournhold, and then buy the appropriate spells and spellcraft the fortify spell we need. Sell the alchemist in Mournhold his own equipment back to him at profit, buy a bunch of his potions, and then start trading the Sword of White Woe back and forth with Cacia. We don't even need to barter for its purchase price because its tooltip value is high enough to allow us to sell it back to her for her entire gold stock as well as the money we paid to reacquire it. Since our restoration is high enough due to our race and class, we have a 100% chance to cast this fortify spell, and our enormous magical pool only requires a restore magicka potion every week or so. From hitting new game to having a million drakes took only 33 minutes, and there were still mistakes and wasted time in there. You could get this sub 30 minutes. If you're looking to start a run of Morrowind, and don't ever want to worry about money, all this actually takes is a room temperature restoration skill and a modicum of patience. If you keep Mercantile as a miscellaneous skill, it won't even throw off your level curve. You will never need this many drakes, but I did all of this with a generalized combat build that is now prepared to go play the game properly. But what's that I hear in the comments? Doesn't count? You used pause screen buff cheese? Alright then, third run. No expansion or plugin content, just baseline Morrowind. Imperial, Magic Skills, Lady Sign, Balmora, Nalcaria, Caldera, Tower, Varric Germain, Orcish Armor, Creeper, Almsivi, Balmora, Basement Priest Mark, Water Walking Spell, Vivek, 3-minute Jesus Jog East, Mudcrab Merchant, Mark, Civi, Molag Mar, Siltstrider, Balmora, Bound Longsword Spell, Draval Andrano, Mashed by Ingredients. Get Impatient, Compromise Integrity, Stack ingredients in inventory, make 8,000 potions. Recall, sell 62 potions, max sale. Rest 24 hours. Sometimes Scrib, sometimes Quama or Rat. Fail casting a 60% cast chance spell 4 times in a row at least 5 times over the entire process. Scribs multiplying at prodigious rate, not my problem. 113 days later, Millionaire. Took about an hour. In retrospect, if I'd gotten an amulet of Civi or Divine Intervention, I could have used it and then waited 24 hours in town, and then used the amulet of Recall to avoid continually spawning enemies by resting in the wilderness. Since it doesn't use magicka to cast, and enchanted items regenerate charge over time, then you could do that continually without needing magicka potions. But getting those amulets requires doing a quest chain. Would probably not have saved time. And you do have to fight one scamp to get the amulets, so combat is unavoidable. And with that, a new dawn rises over Millionaire. What does the future hold for this fashionable, self-made man? Not a bruise on his skin, not a hair out of place. Surely, he will rise through the ranks of House Lalu. You know what? There's a guy I know who was looking for 1,000,000 gold. Let's go see him. Gaynor is a beggar in the temple courtyard who begs for increasingly large sums of money. His final request is 1,000,000 gold. Publishers Clearinghouse. So, yeah. He's programmed to not take your 1,000,000 gold. Don't worry, he'll be back in 48 hours as the strongest Bosmer alive. I'm not even joking. Joke's on him, though. I purchased power. A few dozen scrolls of Elemental Burst Shock ought to do the trick.
Gotcha.
In the grand tradition of Morrowind, Gaynor has something like 60% spell reflect and complete immunity to magic. But there are spells that won't kill me if they're reflected. Let's try some absorb health on touch.
You can't escape me.
Daedroth are pretty strong. Let's see if he can go toe-to-toe with 64 of them in a row. Yes. Yes, he can. What else we got? The Telvanni Enchanter in Vivek sells Atronak and Skeleton Summoning Scrolls. The Atronachs will use a lot of spells which will be resisted or reflected, so Golden Saint Scrolls would be better, but you have to be a high rank in the Mages Guild to get those. A few dozen of these and some skeletons should do. Summons can deal friendly fire in Morrowind. Spacing is important. And he's down. Quick disclaimer, almost everything I know about Morrowind I learned from just background noise. A YouTuber I follow religiously, and you should too. Since this video has a lot of overlap with his video on collecting Daedric armor, I contacted him for permission before publishing it. Love you, buddy. Also, while I was getting ready to finally export this video, which I have been working on for 2.5 months, Juggy beat me to the punch and released a video about the exact same thing. I'm not a hack, I swear. I come up with all my own unoriginal ideas. But I at least covered one game that he didn't. Speaking of which, now, onto the second easiest. This game is actually so obscure that I basically had to come up with the routing all on my own, as online resources are almost non-existent. I can't guarantee you it's the fastest and most efficient route, but it's really quite quick. Elder Scrolls Arena is a game left behind by time. GOG and Steam distribute free playable copies, but the stability is poor and there have been zero quality of life improvements. Character creation is so rudimentary it's almost non-existent, although it's technically still ahead of Skyrim. You pick a race and a class. There are no skills, only attributes with a random dice roll and a handful of additional points to allocate. Your race determines your country of origin and a few more hidden bonuses. I chose a Wood Elf Burglar. For any purpose except exactly what I have in mind, this class is pretty trash. I'm dumping all my points into agility and will continue to do so every time I level up. Playing this game isn't as bad as you might think, but it's a stuttering mess, and the difficulty is severe for reasons I'll touch on later. The biggest obstacle to a playthrough of Arena is escaping the dungeon you start in. It's really bad in here, and it's not uncommon to be level 4 before you even see the light of day. These raised alcoves let you sleep in them without spawning enemies, but there are always enemies everywhere, and they actively follow you. On my very first treasure pile, I find an adamantium longsword, so we're off to a great start. Is what I would like to say, but even though this is a very high-level weapon, burglars can't use long blades, so this is just weight in my pocket. And it won't sell for much. Without the ability to use magic or any potions to my name, the only way to get health back is by resting. And resting a full health bar back can take as long as 36 hours. Dungeons in Arena can take months to complete. Think you've cleared out a hallway? Think again. Monsters spawn constantly, even when you're not resting, or at least that's how it feels. Any Arena veterans can elucidate me in the comments. That eldritch knowledge must exist somewhere. Still, as long as you can stay alive, the perpetual onslaught is pretty productive. Unlike every other Elder Scrolls game, you can only level up by defeating enemies in combat, which means to become better at, say, picking locks, you have to kill a lot of stuff. The enemies that spawn when I rest could be a pushover, or it could be a battle mage that shoves an artillery-grade fireball directly in my mouth. Finally, I find the exit and make the discovery that the city you start in is somewhat randomized. I did a short test run before I started recording and was in Stone Square. This is Emperor's Run, so I need to get my bearings. Not getting lost in towns in Arena and Daggerfall is a massive problem. Both these games could really do with overlay maps like Doom. Most buildings look exactly the same. You could ask for directions though, and sometimes they'll be kind enough to just directly mark the place on your map. After about 15 minutes of scouting, I find a house with an easy lock, a blacksmith, and a tavern, all directly adjacent to each other, and all of them are only 2 doors down from the Mages Guild. For my purposes, this is beyond ideal. In the process of marking the smithy on my map, I accidentally hit the hotkey to stop recording footage and didn't notice for about half an hour, but you didn't miss much. I took a trip via the world map to Stone Square and located a shop called the Emperor's Merchandise, where I remember there being an ebony tonto for sale. Ebony equipment is the highest grade in the game, and a tonto is just about the strongest weapon a burglar can wield. I won't be buying it though, I'll be stealing it. Unfortunately, I'm too low level right now to even save scum it effectively, so I head to the inn and buy a room for a few days. I then break into the house directly across the street and begin resting for intervals of 1 hour. Private property is weird in Arena. Break into any house and you will run into a random assortment of monsters and enemy humanoids. They're basically coded like dungeons. Rest for even 1 hour in private property and a combat encounter will spawn on you. Because our back is to the door, and we can save here, unlike a dungeon or store, this is our optimal experience grind. Spawn enemies, start swinging before we even know what's attacking us, and then, if we aren't too wounded, repeat. When we are too wounded, head back to the inn to rest. I later realized that buying some healing potions from the Mages Guild could have really sped up this process at a trivial cost of 25 gold pieces each. But hey, I literally haven't played this game before today. Leveling up a few times allows us to finally steal the Ebony Tonto. It has +5 to hit and to damage, which will really help because I'm about to do even more of the grinding I just did. You've probably guessed by now, but the method with which we'll be making our million is crime. Stealing from shop owners, specifically. Burglars as a class get a special bonus towards attempts to steal or pick locks, a bonus that only thief classes have, and the burglar has it the strongest. Aside from being influenced by your agility attribute, pilvery, as it's called, is also influenced strongly by your level. The amount of experience points doesn't follow an exponential curve, the multiplier per level actually decreases after level 10, but it still takes longer and longer per individual level, so I'm trying to take the minimal approach. The reason why the combat in Arena and Daggerfall is so brutal is because armor follows a variant of the D&D armor class system. Arena actually uses THAC0, or 2-hit armor class 0, a generally despised system where the lower your armor score is, the better. I'm convinced that the reason why Arena and Daggerfall are free is because it would be illegal for them to charge for them, because they use aspects of the D&D rule set. But this version of THAC0 is a little different. When an enemy attempts to hit you, it chooses a random body part with a weighting that favors your chest and left arm. It then rolls for attack, and if it succeeds to penetrate the armor class of that specific body part, it deals full damage. Especially for a thief class like this, it's pretty common to die outright in 3 to 4 hits. You rarely even have warning. On top of which, the same system applies to enemies, and you can just whiff a few dozen attacks in a row or land multiple consecutively and stomp them into mud. The result is an inconsistent jumble of dice rolls with any concept of skill removed from the equation. It's all statistical superiority and luck. Players who seek to beat the story of the game on its own terms generally tend to favor Spellcraft, as it ignores a lot of the problems with the armor class system. Well, that's level 9. That should be more than enough. Time for Stage 2. We're heading back to that nifty little spot in Emperor's Run. At level 9, as a burglar and nearly maxed out agility, we can rob the Mages Guild blind. The chance to succeed to steal from them is almost guaranteed, but not quite, and it gets better if I put on the bracers or belts of agility that I steal from them in the process. When you steal from a shop, you get a random piece of inventory, and that inventory is removed from their shop, although it refreshes when you leave the area. If you fail the attempt, there's a chance that nothing happens, but more often than not, all the NPCs disappear and enemies spawn.
Stop, thief.
The law system is almost non-existent though, so there are no consequences to getting caught beyond these enemies, and they despawn when you exit the current cell. There are 4 wizards in this Mages Guild, and they are all a shop on their own. They all carry a single ebony belt which is worth 4,600 gold. Not an incredible amount of money, but it's free. It will take about 200 to crack 1 million, but I've done worse. The belts of intelligence are worth about 3k as well, but everything else in the drop table is a booby prize. I eventually stopped bothering to sell them and just dropped them on the ground because it's less clunky than the shop interface. These accessories all weigh half a kilogram. Yes, the weight unit is actually specified in Arena and Daggerfall, but due to a bug in the way the game computes carry weight, they actually weigh nothing. But there is a raw numerical limit to how many items you can carry at once, likely a computational limitation of the computers of the time. It might not be glamorous, but it's dishonest work, and not even 2 hours after starting my runs at the Mages Guild, I have my 1,000,000 gold pieces. From start to finish, probably no more than 4 hours. Of course, actually beating the game in this state would be a horrifying proposition, but why bother saving the Emperor when we have the cash to become one ourselves? There is a version of this game where I could go and beat it in about 30 more minutes by abusing a progress flag, but that's not the version that's freely distributed anymore, so unfortunately, Uriel Septim will remain in Oblivion for another Eternal Champion to save. Next up is Daggerfall, and if you haven't tried Daggerfall Unity, I highly recommend it. Super easy install, completely free to play from top to bottom. Daggerfall Unity has done a lot to bring the game into the 21st century, but the crippling difficulty of the combat remains, as does the gauntlet of having to escape a dungeon before being able to see the sky. We'll play as a Breton, and our primary skills will be Longblade, Restoration, and Mercantile. Major skills Mysticism, Medical, and Thaumaturgy. Minor skills Running, Dodging, Illusion, Alteration, Jumping, and Stealth. Critical Strikes might sound like a strong skill to invest into, but UESP says that all it actually does is roll an additional die to potentially convert a missed attack into a hit. And the odds aren't favorable. It doesn't actually improve damage beyond mildly improving our hit percentage. Increased magery 3 times int as spell points is a necessity in this game, and Longblade expertise will help a lot by increasing our chance to hit as a function of our level as a percent, and our damage as a function of our level divided by 3. At level 1, this is no extra damage and a single additional percentage to hit. At level 20, 20% extra chance to hit and 6 extra damage. It's nuts. The effects of this are felt mostly in the endgame, which is where we'll be spending most of our time. To balance that out, we take critical weakness to poison and paralysis, as well as forbidding iron and steel. These material restrictions will suck starting out, but you can bypass steel to dwarven or elven fairly easily, and for armor you can always use leather and chain. You can also slap on forbidden hand-to-hand, buckler, and axe, which all will not be used for a variety of reasons. I'd add blunt weapon as well, but this is the most disadvantages I'm allowed to add. Another little trick that I use is to lower my reputation with the underworld so that I have a better reputation with peasants, which is handy for getting directions. With all this in place, we can have the maximum amount of possible HP per level and still level pretty quickly. I dump willpower and a bit of agility to pump speed and strength. Willpower modifies damage taken from spells, but it's a 1 to 10% difference that modifies a base 50%, a property that is compensated for by being a Breton. Bretons are overpowered in just about every game except Skyrim due to their ability to shrug off magic attacks. Half-elves, man. Busted in every setting. Once again, we're dropped into a deadly dungeon naked and afraid. It's pretty common to die in the first few rooms. I have an ebony dagger, a weapon gifted to me by the Emperor because I guess he knew I was allergic to steel, but I have no skill in the short blade, so it's going to be rough. Welcome to Daggerfall. The actual city of Daggerfall is not the best place to make your base camp. If you get stuck outdoors after dark, ghosts will attack you. But it does have all the trimmings of civilization. We have a few spells to make before we can start adventuring, and that requires money. Thankfully, we can take out a loan at the bank, and for once, one we actually plan on repaying. Before we can do anything else, we also want to buy a horse and a wagon. The horse speeds up fast travel and allows you to move about town without spending stamina. The wagon allows us to store up to 750 kilograms of merchandise to carry to a shop to sell. Absolutely vital. The fact that only Daggerfall has the wagon is crushing. Heading over to the Mages Guild, because I chose a School of Magic as a major skill, we can join the guild and begin spellcrafting. We need Levitation, Cure Disease, Slow Fall, Heal, Cure Poison, and perhaps most importantly, Free Action. Free Action is a spell you may be familiar with from Morrowind, but in that game, it actually cannot be used effectively since in order to cast it to cure yourself of paralysis, you'd have to not be paralyzed. But in Daggerfall, you can cast it freely while paralyzed, which is why we took a critical weakness to it in character creation. It's basically free real estate. By making a spell that trains water walking, water breathing, and heal fatigue all at the same time, while only scaling with every 2 levels, we have a very cheap spell to cast that can level 3 disciplines at once, all of which are primary, major, or minor skills. It's actually useful that it's a mixture of all 3 because your level is determined by a selection of your highest skills across all 3 categories. Very efficient. I'll also make a healing spell for genuine usage, but I mostly leave it alone. Oh yeah, we need a teleport spell as well. For some reason the vendor version of this spell is cheaper to make than if I made one myself. Now it's over to the Fighters Guild, where we sign up and spend a few weeks in the barracks training our skills. Long blade training can be expensive, but it beats getting the first few levels in combat. If you don't have levels in blade, you can't get levels in blade because you never hit anything. A common piece of advice for Daggerfall is to always spend all of your spell points before you rest. Otherwise, you're basically just leaving experience points on the table. Right now, we just need to raise our level in order to increase the materials of the gear that spawns. Daggerfall is highly specific about what materials can harm what monsters, and starting with nothing more than a steel broadsword, you will run up against wereboars and other monstrosities that at least require silver. We want to power level until Dwarven starts to drop regularly, not just so our weapons will be more reliable, but also so that we'll have more expensive loot to sell. Leveling up in Daggerfall is pretty jank. The amount of health points you gain per level is random, as is the amount of attribute points that you can allocate. So, it's essential to quick save before every time you rest, so that you can save scum the values until you get something at least favorable. The difference between doing this and not doing this is hundreds of points of HP in a game where you would normally max out at 150. Rather than use crime, this time we'll be dipping into dungeon crawling. Just a toe, though. There's rarely any particularly good loot deeper into dungeons, and it's most profitable to continually refresh the spawns near the entrance. Once I'm level 8, I decide to get the ball rolling. But I need to spend a bit more of this loan money on some gear. You can save scum the contents of shops as well, which I do until I get a good enough weapon to be effective. This ebony dagger that I'm not even trained in will not cut it. I'm pretty sure this shield is made of steel, but it might be silver, it's hard to tell. I'm allowed to use it though. All shields in the game perform identically regardless of material type. The bonuses are just different depending on buckler, round shield, kite shield, or tower shield. Later though, I will get very high armor class helmets, which are way too strong to be iron, but because they are iron in color, I can't wear them. Very strange. Shops in Daggerfall are rated on a scale of quality out of 5 states from best to worst. Ironically, what we're interested in the most is the worst shops. It's a bit backwards from what you might initially think, but the poorest shops with the worst gear will pay the highest prices for our products because their skills at bartering are poor. The smithy at Grimhead is a worst quality shop that buys weapons and armor, so we'll be doing most of our business here. I found this place in a casual playthrough and it's become my mainstay. Part of Daggerfall's gameplay loop, at least for me, is that every time you go to a new town, you scout out all the shops and note their quality in the auto map for later reference. Once you've found one worst quality smith and pawnbroker, you've basically solved this aspect of the game. Actually leveling mercantile in Daggerfall is absolutely awful. Since you can't rest in stores, and any experience gained beyond the current point in that skill is wasted until you rest for 6 hours. Also, you optimally want to sell each item individually as mercantile XP is doled out per transaction. But that level of monotony is just way too much, even for somebody who just stole 200 ebony belts in a row. This is why I wanted to start with the highest possible mercantile. We won't be leveling it much, especially since skill trainers in Daggerfall cannot train a skill beyond level 50. We do Fighters Guild quests to go kill tigers that have broken into homes until we get a dungeon map. Go encase the joint, and if it doesn't fit the criteria we're looking for, rinse and repeat until we hit the gold mine. Are you ready for some bad news? Daggerfall is the only Elder Scrolls game in which gold has carry weight. It's physically impossible for a character in Daggerfall to carry 1 million gold pieces at a time. This is why banks exist in this game, and not in any others. In order to get 1 million gold pieces, I'll have to have a bank account of 1 million gold pieces in balance. And yes, I'm deducting loan from the total. We're going for net worth here. Cash less loan. Out of all the games to grind gold in, this is probably the most straightforward and close to the intended gameplay loop, but it still takes a really long time. And it's at the tail end of doing a lot of monotonous level grinding. The first dungeon I try is called the Theodynac Laboratory. Dungeons are identical between playthroughs, by the way, but you need to get a map to be able to travel to them, or fast travel nearby and then eyeball it from memory. This place is basically a wash. It's all undead, which both don't drop gear and also carry a lot of dangerous diseases, so this is just not going to cut it. We want to avoid fighting creatures or undead because diseases have an incubation period, and if you catch one and then fast travel or rest, you can just die instantly without warning. It's good practice to use a cure disease spell or potion after fighting the undead, and before you rest or travel just in case. This is the only Elder Scrolls game where you can reach a dead man walking state, where you are, really for all practical purposes, already dead and incapable of doing anything about it, so you have to be really careful with your quick saves. Daggerfall's design is fascinating in that all quests are radiant and all locations and encounters are procedurally generated, but it's generated from the same RNG seed every time. Every town, every shop, every dungeon will be consistent, but the order in which you're given map pointers and the missions that generate are completely randomized. Second try is the Fortress of Garefield, and I spend more time here than I really should have. There's a lot of human spawns, which drop gear, but a lot of them can deal poison, and if it's health-damaging poison, I will die instantly, due to the Faustian bargain I have made for increased leveling speed. I also realized that I forgot to actually make that cure poison spell I said I'd need, so I go back to town and make it. Somewhere in all this mess I get insanely lucky and happen upon an anti-cleric surcoat of friendship. Daggerfall lets you wear clothes beneath your armor, and those clothes can be enchanted. You also have a frankly embarrassing amount of additional slots to the left of your equipment screen for enchanted sundries. I can only speculate that super endgame players who are several hundred hours into a playthrough are stacked and packed with a very strong constant magical effect in every one of these slots. And there's really nothing stopping me from doing this too, aside from inconvenience. I'd have to spend a lot of the money I have and rank up in the Mages Guild, a process I'm not familiar with, in order to create magical items. It might have made the process easier, but I doubt it would have saved me time. A constant effect resist poison item might have saved me a few deaths, but definitely not enough to justify going that far out of my way. This shirt is aloof as to its actual effects, since charisma isn't a thing in this game, but when I check my attributes, my personality shot up from 54 to 100. This probably saved me a lot of additional runs by pumping the amount of money I could haggle for. Poisons come in a variety of effects. Some drain your stamina, some drain your stats, some your health. They can present very similarly to diseases, which confuses the hell out of me for a while, as I'm slowing to a crawl and the Cure Disease spell doesn't seem to do anything. Remember, always check your status when you see the warning "you feel somewhat bad." Don't just make assumptions. After about an hour of smashing my head against this and only getting 250,000, I realize that I need to aim for some higher tier drops, so I start spamming my training spell to get some more levels. Although getting high enough for Daedric to drop regularly ended up being vital to speeding things up, the downside is that every time you increase in level, the types of enemies that spawn in each dungeon seem to change. And this place goes from a pirate stronghold to a place housing ghosts almost exclusively. Ghosts don't drop any loot, and they love to paralyze you. I start shopping around for other dungeons. Another way to find dungeons is as random map drops from enemies, so I have a few options by now. The Haunting of Lithagon is initially a very excellent grinding spot since 2 human enemies spawn around this pyramid, but it doesn't last forever since I level up and that changes all the spawns in the dungeons to ancient vampires. These guys drop some good gold, but it can't compare to the payday of an Ebony or Daedric loot piece, so I move on. By this point I don't really know that leveling up changes the enemy RNG seed, so I fast travel to Hammerfell and back a few times to waste some months on the calendar. And when I return, the spawns are the same. This eliminates the concept that enemies change over time, but unfortunately kinda screws with my stat for how many days this took. At the higher level, almost every enemy you encounter will start slapping you with paralysis. Since I'm critically weak to paralysis, this is a death sentence if not mitigated with free action. And for the longest time, I don't realize that the free action spell I made earlier is completely wrong. Free action is a very cheap to make and very easy to use spell that allows you to move while paralyzed. I spell made a cure paralysis spell, which is 100 times more difficult and expensive to use. And I named it Free Action. To make matters worse, I thought I'd made a minimum duration free action spell, which was really a minimum % chance. At this level, the chance to succeed was 1% plus 1% every 2 levels, which at level 17 is 9%. I don't pick up on this entirely until after the run, but I do spell make a cure paralysis spell with a 100% success chance, and that's good enough to trivialize the issue. Something I didn't know is that if you sell enough gear to a vendor that would over-encumber you with the weight of the gold, you get paid with a letter of credit, which is highly convenient. That's about 450k in the bank, but I'm not satisfied with my current spot. Let's try the Cabal of Morgiria. Oh yeah, this is immaculate. She's even spawned in facing away from me so I get backstab bonuses. Knowing this is here, If I had to do the run again, I could probably just grind spells to level 17, travel to this location manually, and then pound out 1,000,000 gold in an hour total. Feel free to try it for yourself. And with that, we have made our million. The only embarrassing thing about this run is that due to the restrictions on iron and steel, I went the entire run with chain greaves. Something better might have dropped along the way, but if it did, I glossed over it. Daggerfall took about 4.5 hours, and I actually did it in one sitting. It wasn't exactly a breeze though. Doing virtually anything in Daggerfall runs the risk of death by infectious disease, and often you're not even afforded the privilege of knowing what killed you. Strangely though, the way that this is done is surprisingly similar to another game in the series. Probably my favorite Elder Scrolls game, I'll be the first to admit it has some problems. While Morrowind and Skyrim have vendors that have limited cash that refreshes on a cycle, Oblivion has a limit on how many septims a vendor can pay per item. At the high end, about 3,000, which means I'm going to have to sell at least 300 high-value items. Not too difficult in the late game, but we're going to have to get to the late game first. I made a huge mistake with Oblivion by playing it completely unmodded. The Darnified UI mod would have saved me so much time and effort, but I just wasn't willing to finagle my way around another script extender install. My first attempt was an unmitigated disaster, as the character build I came up with was completely scuffed. I chose Imperial, Steed Sign, Stealth Specialization to help my Alchemy, Speechcraft, and Mercantile level up faster, with favored attributes of Strength and Personality. Major skills being Acrobatics, Alchemy, Athletics, Heavy Armor, Mercantile, Security, and Speechcraft. The plan was to harvest ingredients from farms across Cyrodiil and turn them into Restore Fatigue potions to sell to a lady named Aura Linway at Divine Elegance in the Imperial City. I wonder if she's related to Cyril Linway from the Vivek Mages Guild. This lady is pretty vital to all my plans because she has a gold pool of 2,000 and a mercantile skill of only 6. Meaning that you can get the best prices for your wares there and also sell expensive or large stacks of items to her. Almost immediately I head there and discover she doesn't exist, because I have the Game of the Year edition, and not the Game of the Year edition Deluxe. Undeterred, I head to Anvil to talk to Veril Morvain, a Dunmer smith with 1,200 gold and a low-ish mercantile skill. You can't trade alchemy items to smiths unless you're at least level 50 in mercantile, but that's a temporary obstacle. Merchants will accept better prices at better dispositions, but the way that Speechcraft is leveled up is inefficient, and by simply doing a lot of business with a vendor in the first place, you get their disposition maxed. In short, Speechcraft is actually entirely worthless, especially when the bribe button exists. I start farming food and turning it into Monster Energy drink. Have you heard of the High Elves? That line isn't anywhere in Oblivion, it's a Mandela effect from a popular shitpost. But as a substitute for the High Elf that was supposed to be in Divine Elegance, there's a fallback Altmer in the basement of the inn in Skingrad, who has a low mercantile level, but also barely any money. This basement king was supposed to be my road to riches, but in selling him potions individually for mercantile experience, and noticing it's going really slowly, I happen upon the UESP page for leveling up skills. Mercantile takes, at best, 11,000 individual transactions to reach level 100. And we will want to get there. Selling 11,000 items wouldn't have been too hard, but it's not looking for throughput. Just like Daggerfall, it's looking for transactions. Sell 1 potion, 0.4 of an experience point. Sell 1,000 potions, 0.4 of an experience point. Modding the UI would have sped up transaction time, and it's not like I haven't already used quality of life mods for Morrowind, but the arithmetic of selling thousands and thousands of potions before I even get to ideal conditions makes my head spin. The reason why we want level 100 Mercantile is because when you reach max Mercantile, you get a perk that not only increases the gold held by merchants by 500, but also allows all items to be purchased and sold at tooltip value. Although it's possible to make a Fortify Mercantile spell for 100 points for 1 second, just like in Morrowind, this perk is not granted by achieving Mercantile this way. and overflowing your mercantile skill doesn't improve the outcome. Without the max mercantile perk, high-level mercantile NPCs still have a haggling cap associated to their level, which is never tooltip value. For highly trained vendors, the difference between 99 and 100 mercantile can be as high as 40%, depending on disposition. For some reason, fortified mercantile still lets you invest in shops, but not all shops can be invested, so fortify mercantile is not going to be optimal. The only way to level mercantile outside of a 1,000-hour playthrough is to use skill trainers. The alchemy shop in Coral has a mercantile trainer, but unlike Morrowind and Daggerfall, you can only train 5 times per level. And not 5 times per skill per level, 5 times per level, which means that to get a high mercantile skill, we will need to reach a very high level on top. It would also be handy to be a high level in order to get my hands on a better mortar and pestle, and those only begin spawning at high levels too. This led down a rabbit hole of discovering just how poor my decisions had been. Athletics takes 31 hours to level to 100 under ideal circumstances. Acrobatics, 3,000 jumps that cause health damage. Speechcraft, 2,000 to 4,000 minigames. Security, 3,000 to 7,000 tumbler sets. Leveling up was going to take ages in this configuration, and on top of which, I was hardly making any money to begin with. Even with the ability to make potions out of a single ingredient, effectively doubling my harvests, I realized that this was not going to cut it. I wasted a few hours trying to ineffectively power level and then called it off. Take 2. Very glad that I saved prior to the sewer exit. I changed to a Breton. Their 50% magic resistance shores up the biggest problem in defense of any combat build, and they have a small bonus to endurance. The lady as a sign will give me additional endurance as well. For class specialization, it's combat, strength, and endurance. Alchemy, armorer, blade, block, heavy armor, mercantile, and conjuration. Our first priority is to maximize our endurance. We need a combat-viable build, and endurance is the only stat that applies bonuses per level that are not retroactive. Every time we level up, we gain 10% of our endurance in hit points, so to become strong in combat, we must pump endurance immediately. This is the last gasp of the D&D rule set in Elder Scrolls. Although in D&D your HP gain per level is a function of rolling a hit die that is determined by your class, and then modified by your constitution, here it is exclusively determined by your endurance, granting entirely too much importance to an easily forgotten stat. Oh, also I got all the official plugins off screen. Want the game to be easier? Buy power. Simple as that. Although, if you bought the Game of the Year edition, you may need to contact Steam support to delete your ownership of the regular version to buy the deluxe edition. I just didn't bother and went to GOG. I scraped together enough money for some heavy armor and then go and gently pet Arvina Thelis' pet rats, which causes them to snuggle me so hard that my defenses improve. Heavy armor and block are endurance feeders, and as an added bonus, I also took armorer, so I could get bonus level progress out of repairing how wrecked my gear was getting. I joined the Fighters Guild for a free place to sleep and then settle into a rhythm. I also check all the barrels and boxes in the basement for repair hammers. They have a surprisingly high chance to spawn as junk items, and it doesn't matter if they're stolen if I plan on using them. A complication of this plan is that Arvina locks her front door at seemingly random times of day, so I save scum pickpocketing the key off of her to avoid having to play the lockpicking minigame at 5 security. This takes a while, but it's arguably the most important part of the process. If you haven't guessed at this point, we'll be making our million using Daedric equipment drops. They are very heavy and legitimately worth more than any vendor can pay for them, but they also drop from statistically strong enemies above level 20. We must reach a high level, and we must do it in a combat-viable way. At level 9, which only took about 40 minutes, we hit 83 endurance, which will get us all the health points per level that we need, and we can focus on other things. Before going any further, I want to train some blade levels, preferably to 50, because getting those levels later might be difficult. So I go to Sideways Cave to smack imps with a rusty iron dagger. Very fast attack speed, only a single point of damage, and imps can't meaningfully harm a Breton. Only downside is that they squeal like you wouldn't believe every time they take damage. This works pretty well, until I level up and half the imps are replaced with trolls who will rock me into next week. So I move on. Ever seen a slaughterfish on land? You have now. I later found out that even at the highest levels, Robber Glen Cave stays populated with imps, which would have been ideal, but instead I stumble a bit and grind out some combat stats in an Aelid ruin across the pond from the start of the game. All the time I spend in this ruin is definitely where I'm spending my time least efficiently, but it's good enough. Our next priority is mercantile leveling. Since mercantile is so ass, we'll need to get all of our levels from trainers, and that's not cheap. 10 gold per level each time you train, so at 47 mercantile it costs 470 gold to level up. This is why we still took alchemy as a major skill. By brewing restore fatigue potions we get 5 levels of alchemy, sell the products for the money we need to get 5 levels of mercantile, level up, and repeat. The attribute distribution is terrible, which bites me a bit later, but it's very efficient. In retrospect, I really should have done some acrobatics training by taking some fall damage. Acrobatics training, as a miscellaneous skill, would have given me agility points, which would supposedly reduce my chance of getting staggered. Picking locks also would have helped. Tamika Vineyard for grapes, Shard Rack for corn, Shetcombe Farms for corn, and a bit of everything else. Mix it down until we get 5 levels, sell it to Orlinway, get training in Coral, repeat. Turns out clapping the cheeks of Westweald brown bears is a good way to train Blade also. Above level 70 mercantile, you have to get a quest to see a master trainer who wants you to show her that you can make 10,000 gold before she'll train you. But I was already way ahead of this, so she just gives in instantly. After a few hours of that, we're level 24, so I go back to smacking some bandits around. Bandits wear light armor, which might have a better gold to weight ratio, but really that just means less profit per kill. Glass armor is worth selling, along with any Daedric weapons they might be carrying, but Elven and Mithril gear is basically worthless. It's not great. With a bit of capital behind me, I buy all the upgrades for Frostcrag Spire. This place is actually super inconvenient for anything that isn't spellcrafting and enchanting. The fast travel point is like a 90-second jog from the front door. I don't know why it had to be like this. I make a conjuration training spell. 1 skeleton for 1 second, and a better healing spell, although with the way that spellcrafting works in this game, it's kinda difficult to make a better version of spells that already exist. I get Feather from Edgar's discount spells, and then buy a few filled Grand Soul Gems, and get briefly confused as to why I can't put a constant effect Feather on my Daedric dagger. In Oblivion, weapons can only carry on-hit effects, or at least that's the way it seems. So I trained to level 25 in Alteration, the level that I would need in order to be able to cast the spell, and then start slapping 50 points of feather on the gear that I'm wearing. One thing about Oblivion that I'm starting to hate at this point is that traveling takes a lot of in-game time, and you always seem to show up in town at night. Daggerfall has an option to always wait until morning before entering town so that you don't have to use the wait function to enter shops. And boy would that have been convenient. Shops in Morrowind don't have a fixed schedule because nobody goes anywhere. At best, they either stomp around a predetermined path or move randomly around a small space. At worst, they stand perfectly still until the heat death of the universe. And here's another brain blast that I had while walking around Oblivion. Oblivion was the first game where people could sit down. That's why it looks so janky. A bit more conjuration training in order to buy some more mercantile training and some more bandit hunting. At this level of blade training, even with a Daedric dagger, the enemies are taking forever to go down. Higher levels in Oblivion get weird in this way, where the stats available from equipment plateaus but the enemies keep getting stronger regardless. At level 30 with 100 mercantile, all shops now have 300 more gold, and more importantly, I can make all purchases and sales at tooltip value. The mercantile level of the vendor no longer has any influence over my profits, although I won't optimize upon this until a bit later. It's also helpful that if I do the classic recettear screw-up and start buying items rather than selling them, I can now just sell them back without losing profit since it's the same gold both ways. From here, leveling up is behind us. Only took 4.5 hours. But we're in Dwarven gear in a Daedric world, so we need to do a bit of shopping. Daedric gear is never sold from vendors. The best we can hope for is ebony. So our upgrades will come from killing things, but That is going to be rough in our current state, so I chased down 2 pieces of gear that will turn the tides. Separated to Birth is one of those weirdly excellent quests that you can just not even know exists. Back in my casual playthrough in 2005, I was mildly annoyed by this quest chain for the way that it locks off access to the Thieves Guild's best fence if you don't pick the evil option. But for our purposes today, we want the escutcheon of Coral. God, that's cathartic after getting bullied by them earlier. Oh god. I legitimately don't know how you're supposed to fight 3 of these things at once. It's not like I've been slouching on my combat levels. Just 1 of them is fine, but 2 means that I'll get stun-locked to death. And there's more in the cave that I have to clear out. Thankfully not far from Weatherlay, there's a small farm holding with farmers with endgame gear and magic that can slay gods to take care of my problems for me. Oblivion is goofy at high levels. It's almost like you were never meant to get this far. Can you imagine how bad it would be if I hadn't power-leveled my endurance? I slap a strong fire enchant on my dagger to basically purchase my way through these health bars, but it's still not strong enough for comfort. What you're seeing here is referred to as stutter stepping, an indelible part of Elder Scrolls combat. Baiting an attack, backing up so it misses, and then sweeping in to land an attack. Works in all 5 games. Some things never change. Well, finally we get the escutcheon of Coral, and I realize at this point that I should have gone for the easier damage reflect source and then this one. Oh well, live and learn. In the docks of Anvil, there is a small side quest on a boat where you fight ghosts. Very close to the entrance is a chest that contains a pull on the jewelry table. It's locked with a very hard lock, which is what allows it to have such good loot. But the captain's body on this cot here has the key. Save before entering, grab the key off the captain, open the chest, check the contents. We need the Amulet of Swords. 35% damage reflect, and Fortify Blade 25 points, constant effect. Vital for damage output, but believe me, the reflect is where all our damage comes from. Whatever you remember liking about Oblivion's combat, you were wrong, at least at high levels. It might be because I only have 30 agility, but basically anything you do in combat leads to a stagger. It's difficult to effectively DPS when you are always stumbling. I tried to dig up a probability chart for stagger effects in UESP, only to find discussion posts claiming they could not observe any quantifiable difference between high and low agility. So that's great. Reflect is important for efficiency, not just for survival, but because it's the only effective way to deal damage to the enemy while stun-locked. Now that we have 70% reflect, our next goal is to get a better weapon and armor, and I know just the place. Not far from the Imperial City is the Ayleid ruin of Vindicel, where Umbra lies waiting for prey. Umbra is wielding the body of a lady who is wearing full ebony armor. As a guaranteed drop, you could hardly do better for convenience, and Umbra itself is probably the best longsword in the game. Sure, there's a glitch you can use to get a bound greatsword that does more damage, weighs nothing, and lasts forever, but that is definitely not intended behavior. I do have some standards, I swear. With my new setup, I get back to fighting the bandits at Vilvarin, but the profits just aren't there, so I try the Bloodcrust Cave in Skingrad. Plenty of vampires, they carry a lot of expensive gear, but it's a pain having to cure my porphyra chemophilia every time I clear the cave. I'd like to take a moment to make a solemn pledge to you and to myself. I promise to never stoop to using vampirism as a shortcut to power in an Elder Scrolls challenge. It sucks, and no one likes it. But I digress. Vampires aren't the answer, so I do some research. Southeast of the Imperial City lies Fort Alessia, a ruined fortress filled with marauders who wear heavy armor. And there's a lot of them over 2 floors with a boss marauder at the end. To make it even better, this is a dungeon with a loot back. Much like many dungeons in Skyrim, when you beat the boss you can flip a switch and return to an earlier point in the dungeon. Very convenient. We're 6 hours in now, and this is the point in which I would consider the run to have begun. Everything up until now has just been preparation. I could have already been a millionaire in all 3 of the previous games by this point. Now it's time to cash out. Head into Fort Elysia, kill everyone, Take any pieces of Daedric equipment plus some choice pickings from other sets, glass boots, daggers, shields, and cuirasses whenever they pop up. Ebony daggers also have a very good gold to weight ratio, but the rest of the set is awful. Orcish is the most common set to drop, but it's worthless. Sell them all to Oralinway, wait 3 endgame days, dive back in. But we can do a bit better than that. There's another plug-in vendor in the Merchant's Inn who has a gold maximum of 3,000 once he's properly invested. His mercantile is higher, but since everything is now tooltip value, it doesn't matter. Profit per run is too variable to nail down. I'm not going to bother counting the amount of runs I made, but the process boiled down faster than I thought it would. I did manage to get a full set of Daedric, although none of the Marauders ever wore anything except Conjured-bound helmets. The one Daedric helmet I did end up getting was a random drop from the boss Marauder's inventory, and it was actually a Daedric helmet of water breathing, which is an odd fit. I'm partially rate limited by my carry weight capacity, although if any enemies spawn with armor that's too heavy for me to carry, I can just take it off their body and leave it on the ground and then pick it up on the next run when I have spare capacity. The bodies of the enemies despawn, but dropped objects never do. NPCs might pick up these items, but I can just kill them to take it back. Very efficient. I do want to have as high a carry capacity as I can, though. I would have killed for a wagon just like Daggerfall, or a Lydia to carry my burdens, but instead we have the feather effect. Feather in Oblivion is strange. The amount of bonus capacity it gives you is influenced by how much you are currently carrying, so when you put on pieces of armor with constant feather effects, you'll get less carry weight if you are near empty than if you put them on well over capacity, which really trips me up when I put feather effect on my helmet and equipping it somehow reduces my carry weight. Feather isn't only good for more carry weight, it also reduces the effective weight of your equipped items down to 0 for the purposes of movement speed calculations, which is very helpful as my athletics is rather low and this allows me to run pretty fast. I also get a pair of ebony boots with 80 points of feather. Since the most that I can put onto an item myself is 50, this is a net gain, so I trade down for my Daedric boots. The only things that genuinely threaten me are caster enemies with staves, as they can just spam high damage magic spells at me, and enemies with spell damage on hit weapon enchants. 50% magic resist is a lot, but it's not invulnerable. I could have farmed the mundane ring, but I wasn't experiencing any significant issues with survivability. The spellcasters in here drop strong healing potions, and I can wait for 1 hour to heal whenever I need to. Oblivion doesn't have regenerating health like Skyrim, but you don't need to rest to recover HP, which is a strange middle ground. Two things that are just annoying and time-wasting more than anything are the fact that casters run away from you at incredibly high speeds and almost never stop moving to stand and fight, and that incredibly expensive weapons that a lot of these enemies drop can just completely dissipate from the aether after they die. It wouldn't be until Fallout 3 that weapons dropped by enemies would become associated with their respective corpses' inventory, and that quality of life feature would have saved me a lot of time, especially with how dark it is in here. Dropped weapons can inherit a lot of velocity when they're dropped for some reason, and a lot of the time I think they were actually dropping outside the bounding box of play. I start intermittently using a Daedric sword that has a fire enchant, but recharging it eats into my profits, so it's not really worth using all the time. Still, good to have as a sidearm for when the enemy power attack disarms you, or someone has a spell that disintegrates weapons and armor. Speaking of which, the rhythm is now unload all my gear at the Merchant's Inn and then go right next door for repairs, since the amount of wear that these fights can cause can be immense.
Stop!
I could have saved money by training a few levels in armor and then repairing it all myself, but I was really getting into a pattern, and I didn't want to interrupt it. By this point, I'm at 250,000 septims and can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. One problem I start to realize is that while glass swords are too heavy to be worth carrying back, if I just leave them where they lie, the ground starts to get littered by them. So every once in a while I start making a second trip just to clean them up so that the game's engine doesn't get inundated with physics objects. Another solution I could have used, probably should have used, would have been to stuff them onto an enemy corpse so that they despawn alongside them. After a quick break for dinner, I slam out the rest in about 3 hours. 4 hours total of actually money grinding. The majority of the time was spent in preparation. total time in the save file was 10 hours 30 minutes. Add on some time for crashes and some time spent alt-tabbing doing research, and it was an all-day affair. Between the test run and the real run of Oblivion, I happened upon the videos that It's Jabo did for Oblivion and Skyrim, and he said it would take closer to 20 hours, so I'm very pleased with this outcome. Also, very devastated to learn that I am a hack fraud with no original ideas. You may as well go and watch his videos for comparison, assuming you somehow haven't already. But now we come to the elephant in the room.
Hey.
It was always going to end this way. Just like with Oblivion, I had a big ol' false start of a run before I figured out what I was doing. I made a Khajiit so I could sell my wares for coin, and then I opted for the Thief Standing Stone. The plan was to get into the Thieves Guild and then use alchemy to sell potions on loop. There's a few problems with this though. Primarily sourcing ingredients. The stock of ingredients that vendors carry is embarrassing. Perhaps enough to make one potion that you really need, but if you want to make 3, then you're in for a bad time. Likely intended behavior in order to slow players down, but it's a far cry from the instantly refreshing stocks of Morrowind. Food items from farms can't be used in alchemy to make restore fatigue potions anymore. There's a cooking system for that now. Since cooking is a skill that can't be leveled up, this is a dead end. I used a potion calculator called Potions, or maybe it's Potions, to determine the best monetary return from all the ingredients stocked from the merchant each refresh, but it was a complete wash. There just isn't enough ingredients to be reliable. Even a few thousand septims at this rate was going to be a miracle. Skyrim actually resembles Morrowind in more ways than you think. For one, the Fortify Alchemy loop is back with a vengeance, and if done correctly, you can make a weapon or armor piece with stats so high it loops back around to being terrible. This makes it easy to make a weapon that has a tooltip value of many millions of septims, but there's a problem with that. There's no one that can buy it. Also, like in Morrowind, Skyrim vendors have a limited cash supply, and that supply is really low. Even if I felt like doing the Fortify Alchemy loop to make expensive weapons, it's not going to get me anything. There's a well-known item duplication glitch, but while some aspects of my strategies in the earlier games can be considered cheesy, they were still within the laws of the game's mechanics. Elder Scrolls games are so broken in places that it can be difficult to determine what is a bug and what is a feature, but I think we can all agree that Fortify Alchemy looping and item duplication falls firmly within that bailiwick. So what's the solution? Well, we have 2 options. Above level 22, the player gains access to the spell Banish Daedra, which can be enchanted on a weapon to dramatically increase its sale value. Enchanting iron daggers is the popular strategy, but this is a method favored by endgame players who are already at that level and need more cash. Getting to that level would take a lot of time, probably enough to get 1,000,000 septims by other means. The only other strategy is still alchemy, but much like in Oblivion, it'll cost you. Farming ingredients and player housing is the only reliable way to get alchemy ingredients in any sufficient quantity due to the way that vendors work. This requires the Special Edition or buying DLC. There's a Creation Club farm in the Anniversary Edition which would speed this up even more, but no. False Start was on the launch version of the game. I technically own the Special Edition, but the way I have to play it is a bit funky. Skyrim VR sure does exist. Bought it when I was in lockdown and hadn't been outside in 6 months, which means that I had to wrestle to uninstall a variety of graphical improvement mods that hopefully won't show up and get this video age restricted. I'll be blunt. The base version of Skyrim VR is not worth playing. Your hands have no collision and you can't pick up items with them, which is why I've modded it gently. Not in any way that changes the balance, except that I can now yank items towards me from a distance. The reason why this is important is because in VR you have to have a way to pick something up off the ground without fully bending over, especially if you're playing in a seated position, which I usually do. It's actually shocking how much the Higgs Real Hands mod adds to the game. Particularly the act of looting items, since you have the choice between selecting it and hitting accept or pulling it into your hand and tossing it over your shoulder into your backpack. But to get back to the task at hand, we're still a Khajiit and we're still taking the Thieves' Stone. Would you believe the temerity that Imperials don't have any bonuses to selling items in this game? Neither do Khajiits, despite all the lore in the game being about how they are nomadic traders. No, it's Nords and Bretons that get minor speech bonuses. Why? Starts out how you'd think. Ransack everything within reason from Hadvar's brother, continue on down the road to Whiterun. Huh. Everything's dying really fast. Oh, I'm still on Novice difficulty. I'll set it to Adept. Realistic archery is an option you can turn on in the base VR client, and it's a blessing and a curse. Much more articulation of movement for aiming, but way easier to get wrong. Still, archery is far and away the best thing about the VR client. There's two things we need in Whiterun. Talking to the guard to gain entry gives us a very rare speech level.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often?
We also meet Ysolda in the main square, and she asks us for a mammoth tusk. Lucky for her, there's a mammoth tusk about 20 feet away. This nets us 400 gold and another speech level. We'll be back to put a ring on this later, but for now we're off to Riften. Getting shaken down by the guards gives us a speech level, and it's the last one we'll be seeing for a while. 2 orders of business. See the Priest of Mara to get an Amulet of Mara and start the quest to join the Thieves Guild. Our overall goal is to upgrade the fences of the Thieves Guild and get enough gold to purchase player housing. 5,000 gold. No small task. More gold than any vendor carries in the entire game. The hope is that by completing these Thieves Guild quests, we will end up with the money we need while also having upgraded fences to sell our products. Skyrim is an impoverished region to say the least, and the only merchants who will normally carry over 1,000 gold every 48 hours are the Thieves Guild fences. But we have to spread the Thieves Guild's influence first. This is far from a quick process, requiring us to complete 5 quests from 4 different cities followed by a capstone quest for each. The best job to select for this purpose is the numbers job. Simply put, we sneak into a place and press interact on a book. The pay is low, but it's lightning fast and it counts as a completion for the sake of upgrading the guild. The first capstone quest at Windhelm is to clear out a cave of bandits. Very thief-like activity that, strolling into a gang of Altmer and decimating them all single-handedly. I'm sure many of these quests can be completed stealthily, but at my current level I stick out like a sore thumb, and the sensitivity on these controllers makes moving slowly very difficult. I'm actually getting some stick drift on my Oculus controllers, so I had to tune up the dead zone, which makes sneaking not really possible. Before going any further, I go and get a cheap Amulet of Mara and marry Ysolda. I do this every game anyway. Once I get a house, she'll move in and set up a shop, which will produce 100 gold of income for me every day. Since Ysolda's character is about wanting to become a merchant, I feel this fits pretty well. Also, as a Khajiit, it's handy to have a wife that deals in moon sugar. One thing we'll want to pump is our speech level. Infamously difficult in this game, but there's a trick to it. By having a very low bounty in a hold, guards will know that we've committed crimes, but can't be bothered to apprehend us unless we talk to them directly. When we do, they realize that we're a criminal and we can bribe them to look the other way, which nets us speech experience. And we can do it once per guard in each town every 2 days. It's not cheap, but it's cheaper than buying training, and it's not limited how many times you can do it per character level. Just don't choose the 0 gold option or you won't get any experience. Back to forgery jobs. It's pretty dull. Just this part of the run took about as long as getting 1,000,000 gold in Arena or Daggerfall. The capstone quest in Solitude is about planting evidence on a boat captain. We need to get some illicit Balmora Blue, which costs 1,500 gold. I pay the money, and then am informed that it's in a chest under the dock and the chest doesn't require a key. So I reload and pick the damn lock myself and keep my money. The boat is locked down like you wouldn't believe, and my sneaking is still really low, because if your sneak is low, it's hard to sneak to gain sneak experience. So it turns into a bloodbath. Thankfully, the entire crew and the first mate of the ship turning up dead isn't enough to throw off the investigation into the contraband smuggling. The fence in Markarth wants us to retrieve his silver mold. This is at the bottom of a multi-level dungeon filled with enemies that just keeps going and going and going, and gave me flashbacks to running Daggerfall with the shorter dungeons option turned off. So now we're finished 3 of the 4 capstone quests we need, but there's a hiccup. I have literally done 15 quests so far, and none of them have been for Whiterun. When you accept these Radiant quests, it chooses a random shop in a random city. The possible cities are Markarth, Solitude, Windhelm, Whiterun, and Riften. Riften Radiant quests do not contribute to upgrading the guild's influence, and they dilute the pool, so Whiterun only has a 20% chance of appearing. If we were to take these jobs as they may, this means that in order to get Whiterun influence, I would have to, statistically, complete 25 missions instead of 5. But by quick saving after asking for a quest, but before the details are populated, we can efficiently save scum the result until we get the location we need. Save scumming is a fundamental aspect of Bethesda games. Fight me. Shouldn't be necessary, why must you be like this?
I offer remedies for ailments both common and rare. You'll find tonics, salves, poultices, and potions on my shelves. Browse to your heart's content.
Now that's just creepy. A capstone quest for Whiterun is pretty simple. Just walk into the Jarl's quarters and forge one book and steal one letter. Or it would be simple if the Jarl's children didn't stay up all night, every night, staring directly at the staircase I need to get in. Hey, Detective Conan, it's 3 in the morning, go to bed. Now that we've got the fences up to their maximum cash value, we can turn our attention to buying some property. Windstadt Manor should be perfect for our purposes, but before we're even allowed to purchase property, we have to take care of a little vampire problem. Are feats of heroism usually required to become a homeowner? Do I still have to put in a deposit? Welp! I've never played the Hearthfire content before, so I stumble around a lot trying to get building materials, completely failing to see the free node of clay that is 3 feet from the crafting bench, and the cost of lumber needed for the project actually dries up my gold completely. Mostly because I paid an absurd price for a circlet of alchemy as an investment. As per the UESP guide, I plant 8 scaly foliota? Foliota. And 10 Dragon's Tongue and Fly Amanita. There is a better recipe to farm, but the hitbox on Creep Cluster is misaligned in the Special Edition, so it's difficult to impossible to actually acquire. This is fixed in the unofficial Special Edition patch 4.3. But for reasons beyond my comprehension, if you use the Special Edition patch past 4.2, despite being called the Special Edition patch, it's incompatible with anything except the Anniversary Edition and will instead corrupt your saves. Ask me how I know. Each farm plot takes 72 hours to regrow, and the harvest hitboxes are very inconvenient. The hitbox to attempt to scour the soil is almost as big as the harvest hitbox. The best way around this is to crouch and aim your hand upward. Still pretty finicky, and it's actually the one place where I would hate to do this without VR control. Say what you want about Skyrim being shallow, but the fear of not being able to find my wife and worrying that she's been eaten by a dragon or something is very real sometimes. I throw together the money for the supplies to make a double bed and ask Isolde to move in with me. Now she'll set up a shop and make me daily income. Not much, but it is a net gain in the long run. Every loop of transactions is going to take approximately 4 in-game days, which means 400 gold from her, plus an 80 gold home-cooked meal which I can sell. After grabbing a quicksilver ingot from the shop, my alchemy stand is set up and my barren man cave of a house is fully functional. If you notice some blurring and double vision in the menus, that's Steam VR interlacing the output of my left and right eye displays together. I can make about 40 potions at a time and then sell them to a fence. Any fence really, but Torilla is the most reliable. She does move about the ragged flagon, but she's still always there. My plan was to fence to Endon, who would give me 10% better prices due to the Allure perk. I'm playing a female Khajiit for no particular reason, and in retrospect, playing a male would have been better in this run. Unfortunately, Endon spends most of his time wandering the streets of Markarth, and is very inconvenient to find because of it. Even if it's 3 loading screens to get to the flagon, consistency is the most important. Once I've exhausted a fence of their gold, I have to wait 48 hours for the shop to reset. Waiting in Skyrim VR completely blanks out the screen. And how long does this take? Over a minute! Yeah. Banishing myself to the shame closet for 30 seconds at a time is not a very tempting proposition. I do have other ways of amusing myself, though. If you see me looking upwards, it's because I have a little TV screen layered over my game and I'm watching YouTube. But some quick math determines that waiting this full minute for every shop reset will take over 4 hours on its own. I've demonstrated that you can use this method reliably without using glitches, but this is where I have to sacrifice a bit of my integrity to get a bit of my sanity back. We are all familiar with the vendor restock glitch. Quick save, start combat, quick load, vendors are refreshed. I still have to wait 72 hours every harvest cycle, which takes 90 seconds, but not having to wait so long for the vendor refresh will speed things up enough to be something that I consider a human being to potentially be willing to sit through. At least with this 2-pound bucket slung onto their head. This does put an asterisk on my completion time though. Without glitches, there would be several additional hours to consider. Also, there will be a lot of time not accounted for in that number, as I continually roll back the clock about 20 seconds every reset. I'm really glad that I did the shortcut here because I don't recommend anyone spend this long in VR. This took many recording sessions and was demonstrably not good for my health. Don't let anyone tell you that YouTube is a safe profession. But I digress. One thing that does suck about this setup is that I have to attack her multiple times to actually get her to attack me. Probably because of our guild affiliation. It's much faster with generic vendors. Over time, I try and vary up my strategy for this. Frenzy poison seems like an easy win, but you can't make a frenzy poison higher than level 15 without fortifying alchemy to a serious degree. I end up settling on using the Flames spell to deal multiple instances of damage on her without having to flail my arms.
Wait, I know there's no mistake.
All right.
What do you need?
Do some
Keep
your
your
voice down.
I
Don't
know
let
you
me catch you again.
There's no mistake.
All right. Just keep your
Wait.
voice down and don't
I
let
know
me
you.
catch you again.
There's no mistake. You're a wanted.
All right. Just keep your voice down and don't
Wait.
let me
Wait.
From here, it's the same pattern over and over with the price improving over time. As my alchemy and speech improve, I can sell each individual potion for more money, which means fewer harvest cycles but more vendor resets. Level 70 alchemy allows me to take the green thumb perk which doubles my harvest. This is from the unofficial patch 4.2 I mentioned earlier. It fixed the green thumb perk but not the hitboxes. Doubled harvests realistically just means less time spent in the waiting closet. A major optimization I could make would be getting level 100 speech and getting the Master Trader perk to increase the amount of gold carried by every vendor by 1,000, effectively a 25% improvement in time. By acquiring an expensive weapon, I can trade it back and forth at a loss continually, and then make up the difference with the potions that I bring in. This lets me sacrifice a harvest to the God of Commerce for more speech levels. I just have to keep the vendor gold below 32,768, because presumably their gold is held as a 16-bit integer, and overflowing this value causes the vendor to freeze. In theory, this puts a hard limit on how fast you can do this run in the first place, as a vendor will never be able to pay you more than 32,767 gold for anything. Mashing out these speech levels is a lot more tiresome than you'd think, and at my current prices, I lose a lot of ground on gold faster than I'm comfortable with, so I dig around towns paying off guards and looking for haggling and glibness potions, and any gear that can improve prices. Eventually I get a 20% discount amulet from Radiant Raiments, and head back to finish up the last bit. The best possible haggling prices are to sell items at 100% tooltip value and buy them at 105% value. The unmodified value of the item is all that matters towards getting speech XP. Getting better prices just means that you can trade things back and forth more times for less money. It only takes 20 minutes to hit 100 speech, and I settle in for another extended trading session.
You'll find Rasad with his caravan. Just
Hey Vex, how's Percy?
before we begin, I want to make two things perfectly clear.
Yeah, whatever.
I'm the best at
Oh, damn it, I quick-saved after attacking her. And my speech is back to 86. You know, I don't need to grind these levels here. I bet a blacksmith has more expensive weapons to trade for. 2 hours later and I have 100 speech and realize it probably took more time to do that than I saved by doing it.
Find Rasad with his caravan. Find Rasad with his caravan. With his caravan. Rasad with his caravan. You'll find Rasad with his caravan.
I also picked up some stronger alchemy gear, which means that each harvest brings in several 100,000 worth of golden potions. But I only get a portion of that. Because these potions are now individually so expensive, I usually eat a loss on each trade of 10 to 25% in value. Also, I have to wait for the amount bar to painstakingly slide from the right to the left side each time. You'll find Razad in his caravan group. Just don't do anything stupid once you're there. One complaint that I have for Skyrim is that it doesn't respect the sanctity of vendor NPCs. Many shopkeepers start quests when you approach them. The lady who runs a jewelry shop in Whiterun in particular will not even sell you goods until you've found her son. In Tinola case, she forced me to start a quest to go set up a fence in the Khajiit caravans before I was even able to interact with her shop. As a result, until I finish that quest, she treats every interaction with her as part of that quest. This is not good design. A shopkeeper should be basically a vending machine with function placed first. They can still issue quests, but only as secondary, optional dialogue. This is the only game in the series to make this mistake.
Find Rasad with his caravan.
I can split the stack I'm carrying down, but it's still somewhat inelegant. There is something of an issue with the VR controls. A desktop player wouldn't have this problem. I could mod the UI to be more user-friendly, but I'm deadly afraid of corrupting my save again. At this point, I'm actually high enough level to start enchanting items with banishment, but creating value is not the bottleneck. I just need the vendor to have more gold. Alright, enough screwing around. By only brewing the potions in stacks of 20, I can speed the process up a lot. What you just saw in 90 seconds took me 90 minutes. Just short. Hey babe, how's the shop?
We have a cozy little profit. Here, this is your share, love.
Love you, babe. Skyrim took approximately 13 hours by my recording lengths. I really shouldn't have bothered leveling speech, and also I hardly knew what I was doing. I'd actually never done the Thieves Guild quest chain before. That was exhausting. Arena's grind was monotonous, but it was fast, and a lot of it was what I would still consider to be gameplay. Daggerfall's grind was actually very close to what you'd consider simply playing the game. In my own casual playthrough of Dragonfall, I got around 600,000 gold pieces just screwing around. Getting 1,000,000 gold in that game is closer to an eventuality. Morrowind is a game about knowledge. The better you know the game, the stronger you are. It's not surprising that you can crack it in 30 minutes flat, even if the game tries to stop you. Oblivion is in an interesting place. Mercantile as a skill does not function the way that it should, and endgame combat can be pretty tedious due to the way that player stagger works. But it wasn't really that bad. It was similar enough to the Daggerfall loop that it didn't feel tiring, even if there are aspects of it that absolutely should not work that way. Skyrim's economy is just not fun to interact with. Vendors barely have anything. You could be sitting on billions of dollars worth of stolen or crafted equipment, and actually converting that into septims is made unnecessarily tedious. If you ever want to purchase an expensive item in Skyrim, you can always bring goods to barter for them by purchasing it first with the requisite gold and then getting your gold back with merchandise. But the strict vendor cash limit of 32,000 gold means that items can never be that expensive, and they can't carry much in terms of overall value in the first place. I think it's quite telling that Skyrim's vendors have a very low transaction limit while Morrowind's vendors can carry as much gold as you can give them. I know it's a bug, but it almost feels like an intentional design choice to keep the player down. Even in a casual playthrough of Skyrim, endgame players find themselves with chests full of loot in their house that they simply cannot convert into gold. Useless clutter and unnecessary inventory management. If you want to have a stash of value for all that hard work you've done, you shouldn't need a container with 3,000 items in it, because we've invented a system for consolidating wealth already. It's called money. Skyrim's economy is so bad that it's not even commerce, it's bartering items for other items like the caveman days. The ability of the player to generate or acquire wealth through dungeon diving far outpaces the ability of the economy to reward them for it, leading to a system of fake rewards that feel valuable but don't actually matter and end up never getting used. This is compounded by randomized shop inventories with hard limits that make it so that if a character wants to buy any specific item in bulk, they will immediately experience friction in trying to convert the gold they do have into the value that it's worth. Across Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, it's definitely weird to see that money availability was tuned up for the expansions. Hard to say if it's power creep or an intentional design choice to goad you into buying. Or maybe it's just bad design and the DLC never faced the same level of scrutiny as a retail release. I think that's especially apparent with the Hearthfire growing plots simply never working correctly unless you use unofficial bug fixes. Now, I'm not saying that the inability of the player to get rich quick makes Skyrim or Oblivion worse games. In my opinion, a well-balanced game should gatekeep wealth to a certain degree. But how much the money is held back is not as important as, for lack of a better word, the flavor of how it's held back. In Oblivion, if you have something expensive, you might not get full price for it, but you can still get a rather significant amount of money for what you're holding in your hands right now. And it's hassle-free. You can even shop around to find a vendor with more gold to buy it for. That's a good way to rate limit how fast you can get rich in a specific period of time. It ensures that accomplishment always has the carrot at the end of the stick. Arena and Daggerfall having limitless gold stocks from vendors may seem goofy, but you know what else is goofy about those games? Their difficulty. Playing casually, they are absolutely brutal and can kill you in seconds at any moment. When I get back to town with 750 kilograms of Daedra gear, it had better be worth 500,000 gold because, my god, it's a miracle I'm even standing here. Morrowind is a bizarre middle ground in all things. It's a game where the highest merchant gold value is 10,000 gold, but there are legitimately items that you can find within minutes of starting that have tooltip values of 65,000 gold. It's not balanced very well, but it's also tilted in the player's favor. The combat in Morrowind isn't as brutal as the previous games, but it's still an ordeal, and allowing the player the freedom to become absolutely busted is a nice break from that. Morrowind has legendary artifacts that are worth literally 200,000 gold, but you are never actually going to be able to get the amount of money for that. Still feels really great to have something worth that much in your pocket, though. I could do yet another run of Morrowind to see how long it takes to get money without using alchemy or Fortify Mercantile. It wouldn't even take that long. All I'd have to do is get all of the artifacts and all of the Daedra gear pieces after using trainers to get myself to an impossibly high level, and then using Corpus Disease to become basically immortal. But, I mean, when it comes to how you're playing Morrowind, you have to set limits for yourself. Because if there are no limits, then it just becomes pointless. Sure, you can do anything in Morrowind. You can become a god in Morrowind. But is that actually the point? And I think that's why Morrowind holds up better to a lot of people, even though it's legitimately unbalanced. The rules for the run, or how you want to play, are set by you, and not by a curated experience.